Yay! I'm wearing my very cozy Christmas socks. Hi everyone, I hope you're doing really well. I am very late to posting on my YouTube channel, but I have a very good reason. That's my reason. I've been very sick for the last 2 weeks, so that's also why my November reading wrap-up is so late. But it's never too late to talk about books. Warning though, November was definitely not a good reading month, and you're about to see why. This is the first book that I read in November, or attempted to read. This is Sweet Tomorrows by Debbie Macomber. I was mostly looking for something cozy to read and wholesome, and looking at the cover and then the title and then reading a little bit of the synopsis, I was like, this feels like the perfect read for me right now. This is about a woman who just recently lost her husband, so she moves to the countryside where she opens her own bed and breakfast, and another woman comes and joins her as a guest and stays at the bed and breakfast, who also just went through her own hardships, and together they're trying to heal and move on, and they become friends. At page 150, I DNF'd it. That means I did not finish it. It was so cringy and I was constantly rolling my eyes, and if a book makes me roll my eyes, it means put me down and save yourself the torture. First of all, I hated the writing style. I thought it was very basic, very immature. I mean, if I read this book maybe 2 years ago, I would have felt a little bit differently about it, but reading it right now, after I've read so many books, I'm just kind of more familiar with the writing style that I personally enjoy more, and this was not it. And then secondly, it was the characters. They were above 30 with life experience and a lot of things that they went through, and yet they acted so immaturely. The way they talked, the way they acted, the way they carried themselves, the way they thought. I didn't finish this one, rightfully so. And by the way, even though I read some reviews before buying this and they were positive for some reason, I didn't actually realize that this was the last book from a series called the Rose Harbor series. Second book of the month was actually an audiobook, Then She Was Gone. It's a fairly popular book. I gave it 2.5 stars out of 5, below average for me. It's about this teenager who's very smart, very beautiful, very bright, and then suddenly she just disappears. Fast forward to 10 years later, the mother is still not over her disappearance, and she's still looking forward to hearing something about what happened. By the time this mother wants to actually move on, that's when she finds out what exactly happened to her, ironically. Here's what didn't work for me regarding this book. A, this was supposed to be a mystery suspense book, but the thing is, very early on, you actually know what happened and who did what. It really kills the thrill for you, and you kind of lose any curiosity to read the rest of the book. And secondly, I did not enjoy the writing style. I thought it was very flat. The same goes for the characters. I didn't really relate to them, and I didn't really care for them. Third reason had nothing to do with the actual book. It's just that it's personal preference. When I listen to audiobooks, I like a robotic monotone narrating the story instead of different voices assigned to different characters. For example, if I think of a character as very confident and very charismatic, and the voice is trembling or very like not confident and charismatic, it kills the character for me. Third book is this one, On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous by Ocean Vuong. Also fairly popular on social media, and I've read a lot of good reviews about it, and especially heard that the writing style is actually very beautiful. I read only 15 pages of this, and then I DNF'd it because I was not ready for the level of sadness that was in this book. I knew that these were letters of a young man to his mother, but I didn't actually know that this was letters of a young man to his abusive mother. So I was just not ready to read something very heartbreaking, so I put it down to come back to it later. And I will read this at some point, because those 15 pages that I read were actually very beautifully written, and the writing style was very deep and artistic. So I am very excited to read this. I may actually read it in December, so I'm not going to give any reviews. Listen, you're going to hear me saying I DNF'd books quite a lot in November because I just couldn't find the book. I attempted to read Eat, Pray, Love by Elizabeth Gilbert. You might have seen or heard of this movie played by Julia Roberts, who I love. and I love that movie so much. But when I wanted to read the book, it just didn't sit right with me. I didn't like it. I didn't like the writing style. I didn't like how the author carried herself. This is like an autobiography about the author herself, Elizabeth Gilbert. She is married. She's in her 30s, I think. She's very sad in her marriage. She doesn't want to be married anymore, and she doesn't want to have kids. She doesn't want that whole domestic life. She wants to travel, find herself, her identity, her passion, and what she wants in life. She doesn't actually address what led to the divorce, so she focuses on her traveling to India, Indonesia, and Italy. I don't really know exactly what was it about it that I didn't love. I think if I finished the whole book, I would find out what is it that I didn't love. But at points, I didn't like how the author was very self-centered, in my opinion. It's the second time that I actually DNF this book. I'm not sure if I will ever pick it up again. Fourth book was actually an audiobook. I listened to Beach Read by Emily Henry. I've listened to People We Meet on Vacation and really enjoyed it, and Book Lover and really enjoyed it, but Beach Read was not it. I didn't like it. I didn't enjoy it. So the synopsis is you have two writers, a female writer and a male writer, who are in neighboring cottages. They're both experiencing writer's block. They're uninspired to write their next books, which is supposed to be ready very soon. So they actually challenge each other with new ideas that they're not used to, and they make a bet in order to inspire each other to write their next books. And obviously, since this is a romance book, these two characters get closer to each other, and that's where the romance happens. Both of these characters have just recently been through some really heartbreaking and sad shifts in their lives. So they're trying to heal and move on, and probably that's the main reason that they're both feeling uninspired to write. This story essentially pushes these two to romantically be involved and get together, but from what I felt reading this story, I felt like the characters actually needed to be apart to heal on their own, but instead they kept trying to be together. In my opinion, it just didn't feel natural. For me, I just wished it was a different ending where they're like, you know what, you're the right person, but it's just the wrong timing, and I think we should go our separate ways. So it's just my personal opinion. So Beach Read was a 3 stars read for me. At this point, you're like, did you actually read any books that you loved? My concern by this point was like, uh-oh, I'm heading towards a reading slump. So I opted for a book that I knew I was going to enjoy, and it was no risk. I opted for Twisted Games in the Twisted series. This is the second book by Ana Juan. Before I get into the actual book, I'm just gonna tell you, if you pick up the series, don't pick it up with the expectation that this is a revolutionary topic, that the writing style is artistic and deep, because this series, in my opinion, is purely for enjoyment and entertainment, and they're just a really fun escapism. Me personally, so far, I've enjoyed both books. The first one, Twisted Love, is actually brother's best friend kind of love trope. This one is princess/bodyguard love trope, and I preferred this one to the first one. Here you have this very serious, strict bodyguard whose #1 rule is to never emotionally get involved with his client. Obviously, he does. Things that I loved about this Twisted Game, #1 was the suspense. It's just, you're so waiting for these two characters to finally get together because there's this big tension between them. Secondly, I love the character development. Obviously, she's royalty and he's not, so they have to develop and find a way to be together. Thirdly, I loved how there is this female rising to take on a bigger role in her royal family. This book, why nobody told me? Fantasy was so fun. This is The Atlas Six by Olivia Blake. Now, Olivia Blake is one of my favorite authors, really, and I've only read one book by her. This is only the second one, and I already know that I love that author because the way she writes is just so deep, beautiful, and artistic. You have 6 magicians who are chosen to come into the secret society, the Alexandrian Society, and they're all competing to become members in this society, and by becoming members they gain all this wealth, access to knowledge that are hidden from the rest of the world. But what they don't know is that they're going into this very blindly because they don't actually know what it's going to cost them. This is actually the first book in a duology, so there is a second part to this book called The Atlas Paradox, which I am yet to read, but My theory is that the first book's mostly focused on world building and especially character introduction. You are introducing to all 6 characters, their abilities, their past, the way that they think very, very deeply. My theory is that most of the action and the story and the events are going to take place in the second book. Don't hold me on that because I'm yet to read the second part, but I'm hoping I'm gonna read it in December. In this book, you have magical realism, just the way that Olivia Blake writes about science and magic and mixes them together. And then these characters in this book are very morally gray, like you do not know whether to love them or hate them. Thirdly, obviously because you have a secret library filled with hidden knowledge. This is a very dark academia vibe, which I personally really enjoy. And for some reason, I read this book and I was like, this really reminds me of the movie X-Men, which is one of my favorites. I've watched all of it and I just love it so much. Ironically, somewhere in the book, one of the characters reading vintage copy of the X-Men comics. I was like, okay, so it's not just something that I'm feeling, it's like intentional. I'm going to point out that the language in this book is not really easy to understand. You kind of have to be very focused. Also, it's very science heavy. Now, I'm a little bit nerdy like that. I actually enjoy science in books very, very much. And there is something really cool about this book. It has illustrations. They are all illustrations of the characters. You kind of get an idea of what the characters look like. Anyway, I just love this book so much. I think I gave it 4.2 or 4.5 stars. Last book in November was this one. I Want to Die But I Want to Eat Tteokbokki by Baek Se-hee. I think that's how you pronounce the author's name. This is a memoir. So basically, Baek Se-hee, she suffers from depression, goes into therapy, records several weeks worth of therapy after taking permission, and then she basically turns it into this book. This is more like a transcript of those therapies that she recorded. So if you look at the inside, you will see that it constantly says me therapist, so it's literally a transcript of the conversation between them. So for us readers, this feels like a free therapy session. I didn't actually finish this book. I stopped at page 77, and that is because suddenly I was just not in the mood to read something on this topic. And also, I don't think you can read this book in like 1 or 2 sittings, even though it's a very short book. It's like 216 pages. It's a little bit deep and heavy. You kind of want to contemplate and think about it, so you might want to take it in smaller chunks. I do want to finish this one because I actually think it's a really good book. This time and age, we can relate to it on some level. So I don't have much to say about the actual content of the book yet, and I will address this more when I read the whole thing. These were the books that I actually got around to reading and DNFing in November. Regardless, I'm always happy to talk about books and discuss books, so let me know in the comments if any of these books you've read, you're planning to read, your thoughts. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you in my next one. Bye!